In Senate floor remarks on Thursday, Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell assailed the new House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries. McConnell accused Jeffries of being an election denier for his comments on President Trump's 2016 victory. He also blasted his Democratic Senate equivalent, Chuck Schumer, for railing against conservative Supreme Court justices. McConnell said the words of the two top congressional Democrats signaled an abandonment of norms and decorum. Since Jeffries was chosen to lead House Democrats in the next Congress, many conservatives have attacked him with his statements on Trump's 2016 win, dubbing him an election denier. This move is meant to counter the continued political cost of former President Trump and his allies' refusal to accept that he lost the 2020 presidential contest.
Call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
It has been one of the big unfortunate ironies of the past several years. Many of the same individuals and institutions on the political left who spent the years 2017 through 2020 yelling about the importance of norms and institutions have themselves not hesitated to undermine our institutions when they're unhappy with a given outcome. Just as an example, the newly elected incoming leader of House Democrats is a past election denier who basically said the 2016 election was, quote, illegitimate, and suggested that we had a, quote, fake president. He's also mounted reckless attacks on our independent judiciary and said that justices he didn't like have, quote, zero legitimacy. Unfortunately, when it comes to attacking our independent judiciary, the Democrats' new leader isn't an outlier. He's a representative sample. In the last few years, we've seen my counterpart, the Senate Democratic leader, threaten sitting justices by name over on the Supreme Court steps. We've seen President Biden and Attorney General Garland refuse to enforce federal law and put a stop to illegal harassment campaigns at the homes of justices. And we've seen coordinated efforts by Democrats and the media to use smear campaigns to personally punish judges whose legal reasoning they don't like. The latest target has been Justice Alito, whose great offense was overruling a deeply flawed precedent that prominent liberal legal scholars, including even the late Justice Ginsburg herself, long acknowledged was badly written and poorly reasoned. I'm confident that smear campaigns and baseless fishing expeditions will keep groping around, and I'm just as confident that Justices Alito, Thomas, and the entire court will continue to ignore the noise and the smears and practice judicial independence. We also see growing evidence that the attacks on members of the legal profession who dare to upset the activist left are actually not limited to judges and other public officials. Private citizens are not safe. Earlier this week, a longtime female partner at a major law firm explained in an op-ed how she was forced out of the firm after she dared to enter into a, quote, safe space for women and share her own personal views on the Dobbs ruling. As she tells it, simply being a woman who agreed with the 5-justice majority of the Supreme Court was a fireable offense. Some of her colleagues claim that merely hearing her express a dissenting view caused them, quote, to lose their ability to breathe. This past summer, 2 wildly successful appellate litigators, including a former United States Solicitor General, were drummed out of another prominent firm because they won a Supreme Court victory for the Second Amendment. In their telling, they were basically told to either abandon their pro-Second Amendment clients or hand in their badges. Meanwhile, intellectual freedom and the competition of ideas have also been slipping away in the legal academy. Multiple circuit judges are so disturbed by the anti-free speech trends in elite law schools that they're starting to decline to hire clerks from otherwise prestigious schools that are hostile to non-liberal views. Just last night, 2 such judges participated in a Yale Law School panel titled, listen to this, "Is Free Speech Dead on Campus?" Is free speech dead on campus? And of course, the left's rapidly growing appetite for censorship is not limited to the legal realm. Earlier this week, in a truly bizarre and disturbing moment, the White House press secretary said the Biden administration is, quote, listen to this, keeping an eye on the social media company Twitter, which was recently purchased by an owner who doesn't happen to be a liberal. The antidote to all this toxic nonsense is renewed appreciation for the deeply American principle of free speech and open debate. No one in my lifetime has understood the importance of free speech and the competition of ideas better than the recently departed Judge Lawrence Silberman. Larry was a legal genius and a patriot whose rich and varied career culminated on the D.C. Circuit, where many came to view him as the single most important jurist in American history who never sat on the Supreme Court. The last major address Judge Silberman gave before his death was a powerful and important speech on free speech, which he delivered at Dartmouth in September. He explained how un-American and dangerous it is to enter an era where, quote, some political speech is attacked as if it were blasphemy drawn from the colonial period when witches were burned at the stake. I'll have more to say on this subject soon, but for now, I ask unanimous consent that the published text of Judge Silberman's final speech appear in the record in full at the conclusion of my remarks.
Without objection.
On another matter, we've again reached the period every 2 years when the Senate begins our process of honoring and bidding farewell to our distinguished colleagues who are soon leaving our ranks. Seeing friends off is hardly a task to look forward to, but it's made more tolerable when I get to boast about and embarrass our talented colleagues one last time before they head for the exits. I'll begin today with one of only 2 current senators who were around when I arrived as a freshman in 1985. By then, of course, Pat Leahy had already made history. When Pat was first elected in 1974, he was the first non-Republican to represent Vermont in the Senate since 1856. And now, after 8 terms, he'll depart having made history all over again as his state's longest-serving senator by a comfortable margin. Of course, it's the dash in between the dates that matters the most. And to say that Pat Leahy has made the most of his time in Washington would be truly an understatement. Pat first developed his habit for lifelong learning growing up around the printing press of his family's newspaper in Montpelier. But I suspect our friend never hit the books as hard as he did after he found out that the girl for whom he had fallen head over heels, Marcel, spoke not English, but French at home. The way Pat tells it, he wanted to know what Marcel's parents were saying about him, so the studies began. Here in the Senate, the same energy and curiosity led Pat to collect enough policy passions for an entire congressional delegation, from dairy farming to privacy to landmine mitigation. Pat and I got a chance to work closely together during our long tenures, switching off and on as chairman and ranking members of the State Foreign Operations Subcommittee of Appropriations. As often as the majority changed hands during our time, Pat and I made a point of working as partners. He always knew the right time to break up tense negotiations with a stem winder of an old Irish joke. We rolled up our sleeves and bonded over our shared commitment to extending American influence and promoting our interests using soft power everywhere from East Asia to the former Soviet Union. And like good appropriators, we also bonded over a firm mutual conviction that our true opponent was never each other, it was the House. Our leading subcommittee together saw a major landmine removal effort deservedly come to bear the name of its champion, the Leahy War Victims Fund. And Pat lent equal support to one of my passion projects, our work on behalf of pro-democracy movement in Burma. All of this work was accompanied by great humor. One time, after an election that had turned out well for my side, Pat showed up at our next hearing having found a unique way to show grace in defeat. Here's what happened. He showed up with a yard sign from a campaign of some local candidate where he lived that read, "McConnell for chairman," and remarked that apparently the voters of his neighborhood had gotten their wish. Even just measuring by local votes cast, Pat's colossal Senate legacy put the name Leahy right up there with fellow titans like Kennedy, Stevens, and Inouye. But Pat's legendary service to the people of Vermont has been more than a vote tally. Over 8 terms, he's made a point of becoming not just a familiar name, but a friendly face and a committed servant to his neighbors. And it certainly didn't come easy. The way I've heard the story, Pat's first Senate victory came after he wisely dispatched his darling French-speaking emissary, Marcel, into the Francophone enclaves of Vermont's Northeast Kingdom. Of course, we know Marcel is much more than a natural campaigner. She's an accomplished nurse and a treasured member of the Senate's family in her own right. So I know I speak for so many colleagues, past and present, in saying the Senate will miss our distinguished president pro tem, but we know that Pat and Marcel have more than earned some extra free time to spend in their beautiful home state with their kids, Kevin, Alicia, and Mark, and their 5 grandkids, and with the many neighbors who are grateful, so grateful, for a lifetime of outstanding service.